Hi guys, Claudia Boleyn here. So this video is going to be partly just off the cuff and partly written because there's some things that I just didn't want to miss out in the video. My voice is a bit low because I've got a cold. There's also probably going to be quite a few cuts in the video where I pause to like sneeze or cough or blow my nose or something. I did do a COVID test and I don't have COVID. I think it's just like a cold or a flu thing. So if you see me looking down during this video, I've got my laptop here and I just didn't want to forget certain stuff, so it's written down there. I'm not going to be like reading off it, but that's what it'll be. Okay, so first of all, something that I didn't really want to talk about, but I feel like it's like the elephant in the room and like I kind of have to address it because you guys will have noticed. You might have noticed that I've been getting quite a lot of harassment recently in the comments and things. Thank you so much to those of you that pointed that out and well, basically just defended me. Obviously it was quite distressing. So I don't want to get too, I don't want to make this like about that. Like I don't want to make, I kind of don't want to give the energy to that. But long story short, I have been receiving harassment from that side of the family, on different social media platforms, etc. I'm pretty confident that's going to stop now, hopefully. But that's what's been happening. So if you do see anything like that, like for example posting my personal information, like just basically like stuff about like apparently I'm lying about being ill, all that stuff, if you do see that going forward, I have blocked all the accounts I think, but occasionally new accounts are made, etc. So which has obviously been quite difficult because I'm quite low, so I didn't, sometimes I don't even see the comments until later. Like there's quite a lot, it's hard to keep up with because I'm not really with it right now. But yeah, if you see any of that, I just ask that you could just report it for me. Yeah, I do believe it is my cousin, but I also want to ask you, I do love my cousin and like I don't, like she is just defending her dad, like, which I can completely understand. So I know it's pretty nasty, I know it's not acceptable, like I do know about boundaries and stuff like that, but I will just ask that you be gentle with her because, you know, you know, it's a complex situation and, you know, I only wish her like love. And if you're watching, my cousin, if you are watching this, then honestly, if you ever need me in the future, I promise, like, I'm not holding a grudge or anything like that, I swear to you. Even if it's 10, 20 years in the future, if one day you wake up and you think, like, God, I need someone, I need help or anything like that, you can get in touch with me, I promise you. Like, I promise you I will be there. I'm not holding this against you, I do understand. So yeah, that was kind of a taster of what's kind of been going on. Those of you that saw that will kind of maybe get more of an idea of what I kind of alluded to in the video. So it's obviously been quite difficult with me being like that and like threatened with court, etc. But yeah, it's been quite distressing. But I'm pretty sure it's going to stop now anyway. I don't want to spend a huge amount of time thinking about it because, you know, this space is a space for healing and like to try and process my stuff. Like it's I don't want to allow, even in like a negative way, I don't want to allow this space to become about other people. In some ways that's an invasion in itself, and I'm just what I've learned, like therapy, etc. Just put the wall up and put your boundaries up. So yeah, I don't wish that part of my family ill. I just wish them not to be here, not to be around me. That's all. You know, that's it. Obviously with the exception of my cousin. And again, if you're watching, like I truly do mean that. Even if like you feel like in the future and you think, oh God, like I sent that stuff, like it, like. I forgive you anyway. Like I will forgive you. I do love you. Okay, that's not going to change. If you ever need me, we might be in our 90s. If you suddenly, I promise you, I will be there. So yeah, for those of you guys watching, like it's a complex family situation. Obviously, I've alluded to it. I don't want to get into too many details. It's extremely difficult and it's quite traumatic and like, yeah, it's not good. But anyway, so I didn't want to like talk about it, so I've been trying not to. But it's just because it's obviously in this channel space and I don't want anyone to read that stuff and feel invalidated or to feel like triggered and to see it and think, oh God, like I don't need to worry about me because I've got a big support network, my family love me, they support me, they're 100% behind me, it's fine, I'm keeping a log of it, it's fine. Like I've got a lot of support and I don't want you to feel bad because I don't want you to think, oh God, like if I come forward, you know, what if something like that happens to me? I can't guarantee something like that won't happen, I wish I could, but what I will say is what's important is your own reality, your own truth and your boundaries, and that's what I'm trying to learn. You know, you don't need validation from other people, you don't need to prove yourself. Like, for me as an adult now, you know, I don't think about it like that. I tend to think about it like when it comes to like trolls, etc. Like, yes, it's being projected at me, or it might be being projected at someone else, but it's actually a them issue, it's not a you issue. So don't think about it as an issue that you have. It's a them issue because people are projecting for whatever reason, but it reflects them and it doesn't reflect you. So that's all I say about that. Like, please don't be worried or anything like that. Thank you so much for like defending me. That means a lot. If it happens anymore, which I don't think it will, but if it does, if you could just report it. I don't really want like my personal stuff up there because obviously it puts me at risk of being doxxed, etc. And it's quite distressing, and I know there's a lot of young people on this channel and I don't want you reading stuff that's like ableist and like all that kind of thing. But if you could just report it, I will deal with it. But also, it is my cousin, it's a difficult situation, and it's not my place to even like talk about some of that, you know, because her stuff's her stuff. Just be gentle with her, please. And yeah, I love you, my cousin, and you know, that won't change. It's fine, okay? It's already fine. So I never want you to feel stress or anything. I get that you're defending your dad, and I understand that although it's coming across in, like, obviously it's quite nasty and distressing, but I do understand that that is coming from a place of loyalty and love and protection. Like, I completely appreciate that. Okay, so now that's out of the way. I'm glad that's out of the way. So I tried to think, well, in my more recent life, I try to think that if something bad happens, then you can try and make something good out of it, like try and find the positive. And I don't believe that everything happens for a reason, because awful things happen all the time, but I do think that even after the most awful thing happens, you can turn it into something good or do something good and make things slightly better. So actually what I thought I might do, because it might be helpful to people, is actually address one of the comments that I did get. And this is not me getting at my cousin at all. It's not just her. It's really not targeted at all. This is a lot of people think this. It's from ignorance about mental health, and it's really common. Like, it is a very common thing. I think most of us will have experienced it. So please, this isn't an attack on you know, that particular person. It's just that idea that people use a lot, and I think it could be worthwhile to talk about it. So something that some of you will have seen was said is that my grandfather is a doctor. So I know you probably already know about Grandad, because I speak about Grandad a lot. You might see him on my Instagram. My granddad is the most wonderful man. We're super, super close. He's just lovely. I can't even tell you how much I love my granddad. We're really, really close. And I know I'm very lucky because I'm very close to both of my grandparents. And I think I'm probably closer to them than any of like my friends are to their grandparents, because grandma and granddad stepped up so much when dad wasn't there and mum was a single parent. Like, I'm really lucky. And like I said in a video before, like, although it was upsetting that dad left, in some ways, like, the universe gave me such a strong bond with my grandma and granddad. And also I have a strong bond with my mum and dad now too. So in some ways it's like extra love. So it all worked out fine in the end. But granddad's a GP. So one of the comments I got was that I couldn't be ill, or symptoms couldn't have been missed, because granddad is a GP. Now, this is a really common misconception. So first of all, obviously granddad, like, as of like today, it was his 80th recently. It was really nice. I got him a book about whales. He really likes whales at the moment. He went whale watching in Iceland a few years ago. He really loves whales. Anyway, like, he's completely supportive, and like granddad, I think I've spoken about this before, but granddad's been so excellent, and so is grandma. Like, granddad actually used to drive me every week to my STEPS program for BPD. We used to have these wonderful chats on the way there and on the way back. I just feel very close to him. When I had the really bad, like, breakdown and psychosis thing a couple of weeks ago, grandma and granddad came round. Granddad actually went on the phone and spoke to somebody. Like, they tried to find me a consultant. Grandma is actually organised like private therapy for me. You know, there's just complete support, you know. And obviously, and granddad does this thing as well where he knows exactly how to cheer me up. And sometimes just being around granddad will just cheer me up. Like, we are really close. He's my friend as well as my grandfather. And yeah, Dan and I are lucky like that. I think Dan is also really close to grandma and granddad. Like, they are like second parents, and we are super close. Right, but obviously at the time when I was younger, so it wasn't noted that I had mental health issues. So I've spoken about this in another video, but with me, and I think this is the same with other people as well, for me, it was my mental health issues seemed to manifest in physical symptoms. So there wasn't the knowledge about mental health stuff, so I would keep ending up having these like physical symptoms that I'd get treated for. So obviously, granddad was, and he was a GP, an excellent GP, really great. But obviously there wasn't that knowledge about mental health, because even today we're still learning so much more, there's so much research. So absolutely, you know, I was, you know, treated for those symptoms. So I had gastritis, I had really bad migraines, and obviously we know now that that was just that was just stress. Like, it was stress from the mental health issues, but those things were never linked. Like, I used to go to a consultant, I used to have to go to the hospital all the time to see this consultant, and I was never referred to like psychology or anything like that. I was just treated for the physical symptoms. So like, I had like really bad stomach acid, I had gastritis, and it made me feel really awful and sick and sore. So I used to have like ranitidine. It was like this disgusting tasting medicine, and yeah, it soothed the physical symptom, but obviously it didn't stop what was going on because it was a mental health issue. Like, for example, and this is actually a really great thing to talk about, because I had the advantage, like, I actually have a GP for a granddad, so he gets all that medical stuff. But even a fantastic doctor like my granddad, and somebody who loves me so much, if he wasn't aware of mental health stuff because that wasn't part of what he was trained in, then we can see that, like, it was a society where kids from my generation, and behind that generation as well, so much of us would have been misdiagnosed with physical stuff because there wasn't the knowledge on mental illness. It was almost considered like a shameful thing, or maybe a weakness. It wasn't spoken about, and that's why sometimes you hear like there are people in their 50s or their 60s that are only just getting diagnosed, and it's such a relief to them because all their life they've had these repeated physical symptoms, and it's felt like going around in circles because it just never ends. And the reason it never ends is because you have to treat the actual issue, which is usually like a psychological thing. Now, even with BPD, which is a diagnosis I have, which is borderline personality disorder, even now they are still researching it, and it's still growing. The understanding of it is still growing because, in part because, you know, we are trying to stop the stigma, more people are coming forward, because I think in the past with BPD it was considered this really stigmatized thing, because the cases that would be detected would be if the person did something awful or like lashed out or something. So that became the stigma. But what we're now learning, and what like psychologists are learning, what they're, you know, the research they're doing, is that actually a lot more of us, like, there are different types of being borderline. Like, what does it actually mean? Those cases were the loudest, so that was kind of where it was assumed it was. But we're coming to an understanding of borderline personality disorder which is very different. And there's even, I'm pretty sure the name's probably going to change as well. Something that better reflects it. So when I went to STEPS therapy, we used to call it emotional intensity disorder, which is probably more accurate. So, you know, this stigmatized idea of BPD, for example, and this can be true of like different illnesses, I'm just using BPD as an example. You know, what we now know is, I know you can't diagnose someone you don't know, but just in terms of personality types, you know, it's very likely and possible that Princess Diana had borderline personality disorder, that Marilyn Monroe had borderline personality disorder. There used to be an idea that people with BPD didn't have empathy, but what they now realise is that actually BPD is the opposite. BPD can be an overflow of empathy. So in some ways it's over emotional sensitivity, which can come from trauma, like high empathy. Often people come from a traumatic or unstable or even abusive background, and their coping mechanism as a kid was to try and change their sense of self. It's a self-preservation thing. You're kind of ruled by the emotions of other people, you're very aware of them, and then you start to merge as a survival mechanism. You merge with other people's emotions. You lose your sense of self. You become quite vulnerable and childlike because you don't necessarily develop as you should. So obviously in the past, people with BPD were regarded as abusive because the main cases they knew about were the bad cases. Now they know more. They're realising that actually a lot of people with BPD actually come from an abusive situation, and actually are sadly victims of a lot of abuse because they are vulnerable. We have like emotional instability and the fear of abandonment. So you often hear about people with BPD unfortunately being victims of abuse because the fear of abandonment is so strong. We don't have that sense of self. We're not always very good at having boundaries, and sometimes people do things to us and we might put up with it because we're so scared of abandonment. I remember when I first got diagnosed with BPD, and it was actually a relief for me to have the diagnosis. I'll talk about that in a bit, but I do think that having a diagnosis sometimes can just let you, like, oh my gosh, you can just breathe again. But I remember when I first got the diagnosis, Grandma didn't like the diagnosis, and this was because of the negative connotations of it, and Grandma was saying, but you know, you're not like that, you're so lovely, like, you're so bright, like, you're so lovely. And you know, that was so nice of her. But that, like, obviously that's part of the stigma, and that's why I do talk about it, because you know, it is the cases that are like extreme cases that do get the focus, but there's so many of us. I don't know exactly, but there's something called the quiet borderline, which is something I'm quite interested in. like people talk a lot about, for example, borderline rage. So in the extreme cases that become like noteworthy because they're big, people lash out with their emotions because they feel attacked. But actually what we know about BPD is that a lot of people with it get the strong emotions, but they don't aim them outwards. So the BPD is the intense emotion, but people will deal with that intense emotion in different ways. It doesn't mean you push it outwards. A lot of people will actually aim it inwards. So that's what I personally do with the big emotions, and that's why people with BPD, you know, one of the diagnostic criteria is self-harming behaviour, because when you get the big emotion, not everyone lashes out. You know, a lot of us lash inwards. So why is it that symptoms are missed? So aside from like the time period that it was, that makes me feel old to say that, but I think things have changed quite significantly. But why are things missed by family, by doctors, by all these people around you? So to start with, like the first reason is that people aren't or weren't looking for it. And children with mental health issues, now this is like an instinct, it's not something you consciously do, but we learn how to mask very, very young. Now the problem with masking is that you can't sustain it for long periods of time. So I don't know if you were the same, but if you had to go to a social gathering and you had to put on that persona and you had to put on that smile and seem sunshiny and happy and fine, it would be exhausting. I mean, I used to, after Sunday lunches at Grandma and Granddad's, I used to like come back and be so exhausted I could just fall asleep. Fell asleep after school. If I went out and saw Dad, I'd come back and be completely drained. You know, and it makes you feel false, it makes you feel fake, because you feel like you're living a lie and that you're lying to people because, you know, they're under the impression that you're so happy, and on the inside things are very, very wrong. And that's so difficult, because then you feel guilt. You start thinking that you're faking it, and then you start thinking to yourself, well, if I can fake it for a certain amount of time, why can't I have the strength to just fake it always? But obviously that's not sustainable. It's not something that someone can do, especially not a child. And this masking and this pretending to be happy, now, when I talk about this, in some families, you know, it is a requirement. In some families, unfortunately, they make it very clear that if you show any negative emotions, you know, not happiness or anything like that, then you'll be in trouble, and that's bad. But it's not always something that's enforced. The pressure isn't necessarily something that's deliberately put onto you. With me, it was that I knew that I was very valued for being good and being kind and being smiley, and that people loved and liked me best when I was sunshiny and happy. And obviously Mum was depressed and very vulnerable. We had a lot of dodgy family stuff going on. I didn't want to contribute to any difficulty. I wanted to make things easier. I didn't want it to hit Mum over the edge. I didn't want Grandma and Granddad to think that, you know, I was naughty or something, because obviously back then, you know, we didn't have the knowledge of mental health issues and, you know, not being well enough for school. It just back then it just made me seem like a skiver or something, which actually looking back is really silly, because I loved school. Like the actual learning side of it, to this day, I really, really did enjoy that. It was just the actual environment and like the stress psychologically. Now, when I had my first breakdown at 12, I remember Grandma saying to me, and it was lovely, and she said to me, like, you know, we can't wait to have our lovely sunshiny Claudie back. But in some ways that really set me off in my head, because I knew that wasn't me. I'd been masking for so many years, and it was like after I'd done that for a certain amount of time, I just imploded. That's where the breakdown came from. You know, I'd kept a lot of stuff inside, a lot of things I didn't want to talk about, and it's not just your emotions, it can also be memories. So obviously I don't want to get too far into it, I've alluded to it in the other videos. There were some very traumatic situations, memories, and to bring them up would have caused upset in the family. It would have caused despair to Grandma or to Granddad, and I didn't want to do that to them, because I loved them and I wanted them to be happy and they were so good to me. But the reality is, looking back, and this is what's hard for my family, and I think it might be hard for other families as well, is that they truly did believe that I was very happy during my childhood. Now obviously to me that seems mad, because I knew that I wasn't. I was very anxious, very stressed, a lot of stuff really upset me. I don't think I was truly happy past the age of about 5. I think that's when the turning point happened, and I remember things very, very differently. But that's not my family's fault. It's not because they weren't there for me, it's not because they weren't looking after me or because they didn't love me. Sometimes people don't want to see it, sometimes people think it's a phase, sometimes it's easier to say, oh, maybe she's just anxious now because there's a test coming up, or maybe it's this, maybe it's that. And I did have happy times, and I did adore my family, and I do adore my family. But like many people with mental health issues and people with BPD, we actually become actors. We become actors subconsciously. And in another video I spoke about how I can be quite chameleon-like. So grandma and granddad are quite middle class, granddad's a GP, grandma was a teacher, they live quite a nice lifestyle, and we've had lots of privileges to do with that. So I could go to a restaurant with them and be perfect posh granddaughter, and then I'd be with mum and I'd be her protector and her best friend and listen to her troubles and support her and try and keep her from falling over the edge. And then with dad, again, it would be different. He wanted me to be, well, it wasn't that he wanted me to be, but I worked out as a child what people valued. And I think it's something to do with wanting to be loved and not wanting to be abandoned and feeling afraid of that. I tried to work out what people wanted from me, and I tried to give them that. And again, that's why in later life people with BPD are quite easy to abuse. Dad was outgoing. He wanted me to be happy, outgoing, confident, so that was what I projected. So I tried to be that, but it doesn't sustain. And all that happens is you end up feeling like a fake, like a fraud, and when you actually sit with yourself, you realise you're empty because you haven't developed a you for yourself. That just doesn't exist. You are only you with other people and for other people. And that's why sometimes it sounds mad, but when I'm on my own, I don't actually feel like a person because I don't know how to be me as a person. So I spoke to mum recently about my dance lessons as a kid, and I was really good at dancing, and I enjoyed dancing. Like as a thing, I enjoyed dancing. But I also found it extremely stressful. I used to cry every time I had to go. I used to get panic attacks. I used to beg my mum, like sobbing, like really hyperventilating, like beg her, like please tell grandma, I don't want to do it anymore. And then obviously mum would say to me, well, that's really ungrateful, you do it, you tell grandma how ungrateful you are, grandma wanted to be a ballerina, she's doing this wonderful stuff for you. And this didn't come from a bad place. This came from mum knowing that she didn't have the means to give me that opportunity. Grandma is so wonderful and generous and wants me to have the opportunity. Mum just wants me to have all the chances that I can. And I often think to myself, you know, how did it happen that if I was crying all the time because of it, if I was begging not to go, if it was causing me that extreme stress, why did my family or my mum not read that as a problem? Like, why did that not come up? But you see, also, I was a good dancer. I smiled when I was performing because that was what you did. And what I did like, I did enjoy the actual performances. So there were moments where I smiled. I was good at it. You know, there was a lot of, from a social angle, I think it made mum feel very good because she used to say growing up, and she shouldn't really have said this, but she knows that, you know, I gave up my life to be a mother to you two. Like, I gave up my life. She's a single parent and she gave that up. And that's quite a lot of pressure on a child that she, you know, wasn't directly putting on. But I felt like with my perfectionism, like I wanted to make sure that after all the traumas in mum's life, all the stuff she'd gone through, it meant a lot to her to be a mum. She'd given up everything to do it. You know, she was miserable and depressed. I wanted her to get some acclaim and I wanted her to feel good. And I knew that mum felt good when I did well because she could see there's me on the stage and I'm getting the really good parts because I was a good dancer, and that was mum's opportunity to feel happy and proud and to bask in it, you know, and to get congratulated by other parents. I could give mum that. And that's hard to explain, but it was never about me. Yes, I liked coming first in exams, like getting distinctions and things, I liked that, but I liked it because of how it made mum feel and how proud she was and how much she loved me and how much, you know, she didn't have to feel like she'd given up everything to be this mother and you know, she didn't have a life. She could feel like something was good and I could give her that. So all that my family would think about was, she's good at it. And I know, like, I'm not blowing my own trumpet, there's a lot of stuff I'm not good at, but I was very good at my dancing. Like, I was good. I'm quite lucky with that. I've always loved dancing. I just, like, it really helps me express myself, but I love it. But when you've got a situation where, for example, like, mum was quite depressed and unstable, and people don't want to see that stuff, you know, they want to see the smile, they want to think everything's okay. It's a sort of denial thing. And the pride my family had in it, you know, they loved coming to see me and they loved that I was a good dancer and it was something that I was really good at and that they loved watching me do. And grandma had always wanted to be a dancer. And so in some ways they didn't do this, like, but in my head and the way I'd grown up and the way I thought about things, I wanted to do that for them. does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense. It's not something that they pushed on me, it's just something that I developed. But living this lie, these different ways for other people because you're desperate, like, I think maybe with Dad leaving, for example, and with stuff that was going on in the family, which I spoke about before, it was very important to me that the people I loved me and didn't leave me and didn't mistreat me and weren't unkind to me. And I felt, because I was a child, obviously Dad leaving gave me this, like, deep down, before I even realised, this fear of, like, people leaving. Like, it wasn't stable. Someone might leave, and I'm desperately thinking, like, what can I do so that people love me and I'm good and people won't leave me? And then other stuff that went on with individuals that I don't care to talk about here. You know, that unkindness, that's all I'll say about that here, obviously. But that, as a child, is very confusing, and it makes you think, oh God, like, I've got to make them like me. Like, if I'm more polite and more pleasing, maybe they'll stop. Like, maybe then they'll love me. Like, if I can just keep trying. Like, it becomes like you think it's a deficit in you, and you're desperately scrabbling and thinking you're not good enough, because as a kid, you don't understand that it's the adults that are making the mistakes, or the adults that are mistreating you or doing things they should never have done. As a child, you just don't think like that. So you have different versions of yourself depending on who you're with. At least that's the way it was for me and for a lot of people with BPD. So I had different personas. So I spoke a little bit about this, but with Grandma and Granddad, I had to be the good, middle-class granddaughter that they could show off and be proud of. And they were proud of me, and they did like to show me off. And, you know, I was polite, and they liked that. I was academic, and they liked that. And also, you know, we did just get on very well. Like, we always got on very, very well. So seeing them, just me and them, was absolutely fine. But Sunday lunches, for example, would become really exhausting and confusing because Mum would be there too. So there's this clash of two different identities, because when I'm with Mum, I'm her protector, I'm her support, I've got to have her back, I'm aware that she's depressed, she needs me to be loyal. There's a lot of emotional stuff going on in a child's head in that situation. You can't be both of those things at the same time, so you're split at the Sunday lunch. Now imagine, for example, sometimes Grandma and Mum would have arguments. It felt like being split in two for me, because I was a different person with each of them. Did I remain the best friend, loyal protector of Mum? Or was I the good granddaughter that wanted to please Grandma and Granddad? Like, I would feel split. I would feel split apart. It would really, really hurt me. It would get to me. Like, how could I in that situation? How could I be a good grandchild, but Mum's best friend and her protector? And obviously, you know, Mum said herself, like, she did put a lot onto me. Like, because she was so depressed, you know, she would, when something was bothering her or when there was an argument, she would need my support even though I was a kid. So I'd hear all about it, like, I'd get really upset for her, I'd want to try and fix it, it would just be so painful. And then as I got older, so for example, when I was in arguments with Mum, this would get pointed out at me and I would feel awful and evil because, you know, sometimes Mum would say to me, oh, you know, you're a different person with me than you are to Grandma and Granddad, you know, you're being fake, you know, if only they knew how you really were. Now what she meant by that is that mine and Mum's relationship was more of, it's very, like, my relationship to Grandma and Granddad was very full of respectful. But the way Mum raised me and the way Mum needed me, which wasn't her fault because she was ill, was that we were almost emotional equals. So I heard everything, she told me all that stuff, you know, I had a lot on my shoulders. So with Mum, I would talk to her like I was her friend, like I was on the level with Mum. And then obviously with Grandma and Granddad it was so different. It was a new dynamic. And Grandma's noticed this as well, not as a criticism, but for example, I used to go to, I mean, I see Grandma and Granddad all the time, but like after like driving lessons I would go to Grandma and Granddad's for lunch and spend the afternoon there. And Grandma would say, you're so different on your own with us to how you are with your mum. So I think, you know, it's something that can be picked up on. I do have to kind of fill those different roles, and that's something I still really struggle with. So I'm trying, and have been trying for several years now, to build that persona that meshes those different parts of me, because they are all parts of me, but that puts myself first in the sense that I am an individual. I don't have to be performing these roles in order to be loved. And my family don't tell me that I do have to perform these roles at all. I don't need to do that. My family love me unconditionally. they always have, and I can just be me. But I do still find that really, really hard. And for me at least, I know a lot of kids, they don't want to let their families down, they don't want to disappoint them. So obviously it was a time when mental illness was considered to be like a weakness, dramatic or not proper science, for example. And you don't want to be a disappointment to your family, you know, and that mentality I wish I'd never had as a child. It made me really, really vulnerable. In some ways, I wish I'd been allowed to be naughty, you know, like I wish that had been an opportunity for me. I never really got to do that. I had to be so good, like obviously because mum needed me so much, you know. I never got to do that stuff where, you know, kids experiment with being a little bit naughty and like they push boundaries. I never had that. Like I was extremely timid and like put myself very much second. So the breakdown I had when I was 12 was the turning point for me. So not for my family, but that was the turning point for me. So that was when I realised that I was ill. Like I wasn't just like defective, like I wasn't like lazy, it wasn't any of those things. That was when I really realised and came to terms with the fact that I understood from other people's experiences, they were very different from mine. People were seemingly coping with things that I wasn't. And I finally realised, there was a light bulb moment where I kind of realised there's a problem here, like there's something wrong. So all the masking and all the trying to push through it, you know, it nearly killed me. It like imploded me, and I knew how I felt, and I was starting to understand that wasn't normal. It wasn't the same as everyone else. No one else got completely exhausted by putting on these different like personas to please people. No one else was so constantly on edge because things were sometimes turbulent. No one else was so desperate not to say the wrong thing or generate dislike, or you know, you're in this state of hypervigilance all the time. And that obviously comes from like the childhood experiences, because, you know, like I said in another video, you know, there was that family situation where, you know, you wouldn't know where it was going to come from, you wouldn't know where the grudge was going to come from, you know, you'd try and diminish yourself, you're desperately trying to appease the situation because, you know, there's like this isn't the right terminology, but like, you know, it's nuts. Like, you know, you can't reason it, like you can't predict where it's coming from. It's just awful. But you're young, and you at that point aren't able to just say like, this is mad, like that doesn't make sense, like what's wrong over there? Like that's not right. You take it upon yourself when you're a kid because you think that the adults know best, like you're respectful to the adults. So if an adult is unkind to you or cruel to you or whatever, you just think it's you think it's your fault. So after the age of 12, that was when I first started to research and try and understand what was going on, like when I started to think about it. And it was a long process, but I am a curious person. I like studying, I like reading, and I wanted to know like, was there a name for it? Like, what was it? Why was it happening? Like I didn't want to die, and I was aware at 12 that I shouldn't be having those feelings of wanting to die. I shouldn't be feeling that way. And a lot of people think or thought that to look something up makes it worse or it makes you dramatic. But for me it was the opposite, because learning about that stuff meant that I wasn't like mad. You know, it meant that it wasn't this curse, this supernatural thing, and it wasn't hopeless or helpless, because I started to understand like, wait, maybe this is why it's happened. And if I can understand it, maybe there's a way out. Like, maybe there's a way out of this. Now, my family's reaction around that time, so this is between two big breakdowns, was very much, if you deny it, it'll go away. Hopefully, you know, you'll grow out of it. Hopefully it's just a blip. Now, I knew that wasn't going to be the case because the feelings just persisted and got worse and worse. But that was what they obviously wanted. So when I would try and look things up or try and talk about it, it was very much, you know, don't be dramatic, like, don't think about it, you're going to convince yourself you've got it. And people don't understand that if you're looking that stuff up, you're not trying to convince yourself you've got it. You already know there's a problem. And in some ways it's really good. It's like, it's a good character trait. Like it's forward motion, it's problem solving, it's you thinking there is a problem in here, like something's gone wrong, but I'm not just going to sit idly by, like I'm going to take some control. I am going to try and fix this. Obviously that was very... The denial of the mental health issues, and whenever it's brought up, you know, oh, you know, you're being dramatic, you're fine, you know, you're so good at school, like, you're so polite, like, everyone likes you, you can't be ill. That sort of invalidation, which doesn't always come from a bad place either. Sometimes it comes from a place of denial because your family don't want you to have those troubles. They don't want you to be ill. So they're desperate for you to just recover and everything to be fine again. So I went through years of internalizing, feeling like I was overdramatic or hysterical or like looking for stuff, and that really hurts because that sort of invalidation like stays with you all your life. So for example, like, you know, getting comments like, you know, you're lying, it wasn't that, that sort of thing. People think we don't think of that stuff, but actually we have a lot of self-doubt, and that's actually a sign of how real it is, because you do, like, I certainly, like, for years and years I would go back and forward, and sometimes I'd think like, maybe I'm fine, maybe I'm just like maybe I do just need to get a grip or something. But obviously you can't do that. Thankfully, like, obviously now I'm older and everything, like, I understand it's an illness, and just because it's in the mind and people can't see it doesn't mean it's not there, but you doubt yourself so much. Right, so after the second breakdown, and this was when I overdosed, so this was the turning point for my family. So obviously I'd reached my turning point at around 12, and I think part of the breakdown in those later teen years, you know, in part was due to I really do, and I don't blame anyone, but I think certainly the idea that you're dramatic, there's nothing wrong, like, you're making a big deal of it, that doesn't help, because it comes from a good place, but it actually just makes you feel so much worse, because then you start thinking like, well, what the hell's wrong with me then? Like, and you get hopeless because you feel like there's no path out. Right, so after my overdose, this is when my family were fantastic. They realised, especially grandma and granddad, okay, this is an illness. And this is because when we were at the hospital, you know, they spoke to me, and that was when, I believe that was before my BPD diagnosis, that was the first time they said to me, right, we think you might have borderline personality disorder, we want to get you checked. I had to go to the hospital and stuff, they had to, like, check I was alright, etc. And I think what saved my life more than anything was the point when my family finally acknowledged it, because sometimes you feel like Cassandra at the fall of Troy. You feel like this mad hysterical person because there's this huge glaring problem, and everyone around you is like denying it, and it's crazy making. Like, it makes you feel, I can't even explain the feeling of that, but to have the people you love around you being like, okay, yes, I now see it, and we're going to help you, it makes so much difference. Like, it was no longer, there was this transition where no longer was it considered to be like self-centered or anything to talk about the mental health stuff. It was encouraged, and I was very, like, supported with it, and my family learned as I learned, obviously because we're still becoming more knowledgeable about mental health issues. Talking about it on my blog and online, all that mental health stuff was so important for me. So being able to vocalise that stuff is a huge deal, because for so long we feel like we can't, we don't want to seem dramatic, like, is it in our heads, like, you don't want to cause trouble or anything like that. Being able to do that gave me, and seeing other people talking about things and being able to see them say they had a symptom, and you going, oh my god, I felt that way all my life, there's a name for that, like, I'm not crazy, like, that's something that you experience too, like, maybe I'm not like a defective person, like, maybe I am just ill, maybe I can get out of this. And through that, and through talking about it, the shame started to fade surrounding it. And the shame comes from society, because we're still in a society where we view mental illness as a weakness. Some people still view it as a weakness. And it's not a weakness, it's just something that some people struggle with. It's like an additional obstacle. But in life we all have struggles, like we all have them. It just so happens that some people's is in the mind. Now the difficulty is that sometimes when you talk about these things, there is backlash. And unfortunately, like, I don't want to get into it too much, you know, that there was backlash for me from a certain part of my family, you know, like, oh god, have you seen what she's saying, like, all that stuff. But what you do is you have to cling to your reality and your sense of self, because especially with something like BPD, or it might be true of other things as well, I don't know, you have that inbuilt, like, doubt in yourself, and you have to learn that your experience and your reality is yours, and it doesn't matter, like, other people's validation, other people's thoughts on it, it doesn't matter, because nobody knows what's going on in your head more than you do. Like, you know that, other people don't know that, and that's the frustrating thing with mental health issues, is that it's not like a physical disability where you can get a scan and they'll say, right, yeah, that's right. It's very much through your description of your experiences, and I think some people think, oh, well, because they're just saying it, like, it can't be true, But then even with that being said, Obviously a lot of us would have had physical symptoms before then, so there was evidence, you know, there were different points that we can map out and we can see what the mental illness did. It just so happens that you can't necessarily get a scan and they're like, oh yes, there's BPD on the brain. And it's got like an uplifting like ending, or like, not that this is the ending, but like obviously coming from a place where I told you in another video, I felt naughty or bad when I was showing my symptoms because I wanted so much to be good, and my family didn't understand it at all. But I'm at a place now where I really can talk to my family about things. Like, Grandma and Granddad are incredible. So Granddad obviously takes me to my therapy, or he took me to my therapy whenever I need to do something, he does that. He's really good at like uplifting me. Grandma will actually ask me, like, it's not like this taboo, it's not like a shameful thing in our family anymore, and it's really helped me so much, and I'm so grateful to them. Because Grandma said to me, she said, if you had like a physical disability, you know, people would ask you, you know, how's your broken leg? So Grandma will say to me, you know, how's things? How's your mental health? And like when I had my breakdown, she bought me roses and a card saying get well soon. It's taking away that stigma and that alienness and just treating it like what it is, which is an illness that some of us have. I don't have to mask those symptoms with Mum anymore. So where in the past, I mean, Mum is on medication now. She's not as depressed as she was. So she now has the strength in her. And I feel so gutted for her that she lived in a generation just before me. You know, she was just the wrong side of the barrier. Because if she'd had those antidepressants when she was younger, I really think Mum, there's so much that Mum could have done and things that could have been different. But because she now has that power and she has her antidepressants, she now has the strength in her and the space within her to support me. So growing up, I supported Mum a lot. And now she's able to support me and we can support each other. And, you know, we can do that for each other. If I'm having a bad day, I don't have to try and, like, hold it in and not cry and pretend that I'm not crying or do it in secret. I can just have a cry and I can just say to Mum, oh God, I'm having a bit of a bad day. And she'll say, oh, tell me about it, what's the problem? Like, my family all know that I do my YouTube, and I did the documentary for Channel 5 where I spoke about me and my mental illness, and I spoke about having BPD. And they were so proud of me, and it just felt like, it sounds stupid, but it sounds like the end of a film, you know, like the story has like moved forward to the point that they're really proud of me and supportive. And like Grandma told me the other day how much she admires me for talking about this stuff, because one thing that Grandma always says about me, she always says that I am and always have been honest about the illness. Like, I've always been honest about how I feel about it, and I've been open about it, and she really, really admires that. And it means a lot that she admires that, because I admire Grandma so much, and Grandma is an incredibly strong woman in her way. Grandma's a socialist, you know, she's really good. Mum's a strong woman too, and the fact that, like, my family are proud of me, and, like, sometimes I in my PO box I used to get, like, lots of letters from people, and I that was just so touching and amazing, and they were so proud that I was using, you know, my stuff to maybe, like, help other people. And I feel like as well the fact that these videos are like public videos, it feels like a triumph for me, because there was a time when I would mask so much and I wouldn't want to show vulnerability and I didn't want to be judged and all that stuff. And now anyone who wants to can watch these videos. And I don't mind. I don't need validation. The people that get it will get it, the people that don't won't. And maybe something that I say will sink in at some point in the future. Maybe they'll think about something, you know, who knows? You know, Dan watches the videos. He knows about how I am, and Dan's been magnificent. He's so protective of me, and we're so close. And when I am frail and when I'm bad, you know, he steps up. And when I was younger, I didn't have a protector. Stuff happened to me and I didn't have a protector, because of the way things were. Dan was obviously younger than me then, and now I do. Now I do finally have somebody there to, like, protect me and have my back, and, like, I've never felt that, and that's why, like, Dan's my hero, because that's who he is for me, you know. He is there for me. I just love him so much. So going back to kind of the initial thing, so trolls will often use the things that I spoke about as insults, saying that you're making it up, or that it's dramatic, or that it's just a plea for attention, or that you're lazy, etc., etc., you know, you don't want to work, all those different things. Now, those things in the past obviously would have been quite hurtful, but for me now, you know, they don't really touch me, because I do have a sense, I know that it's, you know, it's an illness, and I think those of us that have it, hopefully you're at a point where you know that. Now, what that speaks of to me is a culture, it's a cultural issue, and in some ways it's sad, because it's a vulnerability that other people have. It's a projection from them. And I feel bad for those people, because those people are hurting themselves with that mentality. Because any one of us, I mean, a lot of us are going to suffer from mental health issues in our life, whether that's something that's long-standing or whether it's something that's just going to come up for a brief period of time. But most of us are probably going to experience that. Now, those people who see it as something that's a weakness or a flaw, they're not going to be able, they can't extend their compassion to others, so they won't be able to extend that compassion to themselves. They're probably going to be quite cruel to themselves. They're going to be hard on themselves. They're going to have very harsh judgments. You know, they're going to need to be at a certain standard, and those people are going to really struggle if something like that happens, if there's a grief, or because they'll feel like they'll feel weak, and they'll feel like they've let people down, and it's really sad. And in some ways, we've reached a point where we are above that. We're slightly ahead with our understanding. That's why I feel pity and not so much anger for a lot of that, because I think it comes from a place of deep insecurity and projection, and ultimately it's a fit. That person is, I think when people say things like that, it is more about them. It reveals more about their psyche, their worldview, than the person they're talking to. That tells me that someone is afraid of weakness, insecure. Maybe they have to feel like they're a certain way to have value. And that's a horrible, awful way to live. You're not only worth love and compassion and respect if you're being productive, like, or in like the capitalist sense. You know, that's not the reason you're important. You know, you have value as a person simply because you're alive and because you're here. My life became better. My mental health and the way I thought about my mental health changed when I made the choice that I wasn't going to be ashamed. And although sometimes it's hard to show compassion to yourself, I do struggle with that because of putting myself second so much in life. But if you show compassion to others, if you boost them up, it really helps you, because in a selfish way, by supporting others, you are supporting yourself, because you're reinforcing those ideas that people aren't weak, they are worthy of respect. We don't need to judge people against us, like we don't need to impose those, because sometimes we're going to fall short of our own judgment. So if we're like judgmental people, at some point it's going to circle back and it's going to get us. So it's not a very healthy way to be. You certainly can't like have a checklist of like demand people present in a certain way to be ill, because obviously that's ignorance, and it's people who don't really understand. They haven't got the, in some ways, like some people know very early on in life, they understand that, but some people aren't so good at that stuff. Because of insecurity, to them it's like a hierarchy thing. And I think those people are deep down, I think they're afraid there's not enough love or compassion to go around. And that's why they're afraid of people taking any love or any compassion, because obviously we know that there's an endless amount of love and compassion. You can love everyone. It's not something that, there's no end to it. There's no end to love. But I think those people are afraid there's not enough to go around, and so they're desperate to prove that some people aren't worthy of it. The thing with mental illness, and that I hope, you know, anyone watching this who does think that way is taking away from it, is that because it is in the mind, and because people mask, and there's different reasons for that, you can't always tell. I mean, when somebody commits suicide, actually I hate the term commits suicide, it makes it sound like a crime, doesn't it? Takes their own life is probably a better way to say it. But so often when something tragic like that happens, there's shock, because the family will say, but they had a good job and they seemed so fine and they laughed. And often a misconception about like depression and suicide, for example, is that it's, first of all, that it's a planned thing. So sometimes a suicide is a spur of the moment reaction. But the other misconception is that you're obviously depressed beforehand. Actually, I think in a lot of people, unfortunately, what you see is actually a strange period of being more uplifted beforehand. And in some cases, that's the danger area, because sometimes, I know for me, before I overdosed, I went through that weird calm period beforehand where I detached from everything, and I actually felt quite calm. So I wouldn't have been sobbing or anything like that. You know, that's the danger area, because that's sometimes when a person's made a decision, that's the worrying part. But also people who are depressed, who are ill, we laugh sometimes. Like, sometimes I will be crying and I'll laugh while I'm crying. Like, I'll be sobbing and like sitting with Granddad, and Granddad will make me laugh, and I'll have tears streaming down my cheeks, and I'll laugh while I'm crying, you know? Emotions are complicated, people are complicated. And people think because you have a loving family around you, or a support system, or a GP for a granddad, you know, that you can't be ill. Obviously to most people that doesn't make sense, because, you know, that's like saying, oh, your grandfather's a GP, there's a GP in your family, so for example you can't have, you couldn't possibly get cancer or anything because there's GP in the family, like a GP is like some sort of protective amulet. You know, that's not how it works. But with a loving, supporting family, and not everyone has that, and people have, you know, and you know some of my story, I've told you some of it. It wasn't always loving and kind, you know, there's some things that weren't good, but I've always had love from my immediate family. That doesn't, just because someone has the support, it doesn't mean that someone's not ill. Like, I wish that you could love someone so much that you could heal them, I wish. But you can't. That's not how it works. So often the message that comes from that kind of mentality and trolls like that, the message that really comes through to me, what they're really saying, is how dare you not be ashamed of your weakness. Your weakness, I'll put in quotation marks. Because to them, weakness is shame, and I think it's disturbing, and in some ways there's envy, and they can't understand, because they're not necessarily bad people, but they've been taught that that sort of thing is a weakness, and if they showed that weakness, they would feel lesser, or be made to feel lesser. And I feel for those people, because it isn't a weakness. Like, I don't regard it as a weakness, I just regard it as a part of me, like a part of who I am. I think one of the things of myself that I am proud of, because I am trying to work on having more self-esteem and that kind of thing, and I do have a lot of flaws I'm trying to work on, but one of the things that I am proud of developing is that sense of not feeling that shame surrounding things that I don't have to feel shame for, things that are an illness. And in some ways I actually feel like proud of myself, because I think that I've researched, I've got help, I've tried to understand it, and I am trying to get better, and if I can help anyone else, obviously that's a bonus, because sometimes I talk about stuff that I wish I'd seen when I was younger, and that's kind of why I talk about this stuff, because I just wish that, like, oh, I wish I'd seen it, or my family had seen it, or, you know, it's easy when you look back, like, to think like that. But a popular video I made a long time ago, there was this article called something like 10 signs your mental illness is made up for attention, and it was really ableist, and it created this like idea of suspicion, like these are the tests you put people through to see if they're faking. And aside from that being an awful idea, it was wrong, because a lot of the things on that list were actually things that mentally ill people did do, like that were actual symptoms of mental illness. Anyway, I made a response video to that, and thankfully a lot of people resonated with that, because obviously mental illness is, if you actually talk to people who have it, it's more complicated. Like, it's not like constant crying all the time, like it's not like that. But it is that idea of hierarchy, and it's that idea that there isn't enough to go around. And not to bring this to society, but I always do this, but it's the same, to me, it's that I like to, these mentalities and the way people think can always be applied to society, in my opinion. Because it's the same situation, for example, around like asylum seekers, refugees and immigrants. So there is technically enough resources. I mean, look at our planet and like the poverty. Now, if we wanted to, there's enough resources that we could take everyone out of poverty, and we could all live, you know, in relative sort of comfort. We would have enough to survive on. And like with immigrants and refugees, for example, a fear is drummed up, because the people in charge, they know there's enough resources, but they want to do what they want with it. They don't really want to be giving it to ordinary people. So they create that feeling of suspicion, and they make people hate people on benefits, people who are immigrants, any of those people who need assistance in any way, because they tell the lie that there's only a certain amount to go around, and that keeps people against each other. You know, it stops people who should be friends and siblings, like, banding together and saying, wait, there's enough resources here, we don't need to make villains of each other here, like, what are you guys doing at the top, like, with all that money? And for any, like, trolls that are watching this, or maybe in the past, anything like that, anyone who's thought that way or said that, you know, first of all, I want to say that, like, don't worry, I get it, I completely forgive you, I don't hold any grudges. Like, I think that so often, like, maybe these people have like, maybe they've got their own illnesses, or, you know, their own disorders, and maybe they deserved compassion and maybe they didn't get it, maybe they weren't validated, maybe they didn't get the help they needed. and you did deserve that. Like, you deserved to have that help. And I can understand how that turns into a feeling of, like, frustration and seeing it as a weakness. I completely get that. But, you know, all of us are completely worthy of that compassion, and not all of us got it, but you did deserve that, and it's fine. Like, I don't hold it against you at all. I don't want anyone to, like, think about anything that they've sent or something, like, in the past and think, oh god, like, it's awful, it's awful. I completely forgive you. I completely get it. Don't worry. I think a lot of people are taught that those bad emotions are dangerous and weak and make them vulnerable, and so there's this reaction that's kind of, in some ways, it's placed into children really young, of getting an emotion like that, and instead of being able to cope with it, you're like, ooh, 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 and you're like, disgusting, and like, get it away from me, like, I don't want to be near it, I don't want to sit with it, I can't sit with that bad emotion. But that icky sort of feeling, that gross feeling you get when someone talks about it, it isn't about that person that you're watching, it's about your own relationship with illness and what you perceive as weakness and how you judge yourself. That's the icky feeling, and I know it's horrible to unpack that. But if you can unpack that, you will become so much better. And I get that it's unsettling. Like, I went through this stage when, like, I thought, well, I'm going to become really hard-hearted, and I used to like baddies rather than goodies all the time. And like, oh, not these twee do-gooders. And it was my way of trying to, like, distance from vulnerability and kindness and all that stuff. Thankfully, I came out of that. But I understand it, because I could have gone that way. I was lucky that I didn't. You know, I went the other way, and so I'm so lucky that I ended up with, my response is more empathetic. That was where I ended up, but I could have gone the other way, and I get that. Like, it's just circumstances. Like, I used to feel like sincerity used to make me feel actually ill. Like, it actually used to make me feel sick. Like, vulnerability used to make me feel sick. When I was younger, and I won't go into why, but I would feel sick when I ever saw someone apologise. I would feel sick and awful when I had to apologise, because that was me having to admit to a weakness. And that weakness freaked me out to the point of shame that I felt like I had to die or something. Like, it was really bad. But that was my own issue. That was a defence mechanism, and it wasn't healthy for me. Ultimately, that does more harm than good, because you end up hurting other people, but ultimately you're also hurting yourself. You're not being compassionate towards yourself. When you fall short, you're going to really beat yourself up about it. You're going to have these standards you have to uphold. You don't have to be that way. You're just human. And I think also that response can come from people that have been taught, either directly or indirectly, that certain emotions are bad. And that's really common in all sorts of families. So, for example, like the positive emotions, like happiness, all those kind of things are like really rewarded. But there's not really the validation if someone's sad, if someone's upset, if they're angry. I mean, it could be something as simple as never seeing your parents cry or emote because they viewed it as weakness, and you learned then that they thought it was a weakness and it became a weakness to you too. It might be that when you felt a certain way and you expressed it, you were regarded as like dramatic or hysterical or attention seeking. Maybe your feelings have just been completely denied. Like, maybe it distressed people when you were upset and you thought it wasn't worth the hassle it caused, so you put it back inside. Maybe you didn't want to worry people, maybe you wanted to be perfect, maybe you didn't want to feel like a burden. Maybe you had parents that were suffering themselves and they weren't equipped to deal with their own issues, so how could they possibly be there to deal with yours? So yours were kind of put on the back burner. It might be that you have parents that you've seen like disparage people or criticize people that show those emotions, so that's what you learn. That's what you learn is normal because your parents do that. And because they're contemptuous about those people, you then think, I want them to love me. I'd never want them to show that kind of contempt and unkindness to me, so I better hit a certain standard. It's like an unspoken threat in some ways. However it happened, and I think loads of us, like mentally ill or not, have a lot of guilt and shame attached to certain emotions. I think that this can be a good example of this that's really difficult would be for men and boys who are taught, and this is like a cultural thing that we're immersed in, so it's so hard to get out of. And it's the idea of gender roles and the ideas of, you know, be a strong man and don't cry and be the protector and you support other people and you're the head of the family, all that stuff. But when we tell little boys not to cry because it makes them like unmanly, that's a message. You know, when we're seeing action heroes for boys like on TV that are all about like rage and like power, but they don't show vulnerability, that's another way we're teaching boys, and that's a way that we're hurting them. I know that growing up alongside Dan really formed a lot of my opinions on this stuff, because we both have our own issues. We both went through the same thing in different ways because we had different roles, different ages, but our genders informed a lot of it. So Dan was taught, man up, don't cry, get a grip, deal with it. Therefore, Dan's became a sort of angry, sort of pent up thing. Mine was, don't be dramatic, don't be hysterical, like, don't be that crazy hysterical woman. So, and then with me it was like invalidated, so I got a lot of self-doubt and it went very inwards. I mean, women and girls are often like labelled like as hysterical for reacting in a way that's perfectly rational. Like, we see that all the time, and unfortunately when crimes are committed sometimes you can see that the way that cultural idea and that those gender roles like can skew an opinion on that. And also boys who show their vulnerability and they're upset, they're viewed as feminine in some way, and in the patriarchal like society that we live in, that's the worst insult they can give you. You know, you're not acting like a man, you're acting like a girl, like stop being such a girl. I just think it's really evil, and it's evil for boys and for girls, you know, in different ways. And it's just another way that we learn that certain emotions are not going to be, you're not going to get time for them, you're not allowed to hold them, like they're bad, they'll make you be judged. I mean, an example of this, I talk about this so much, but I'm not a royalist, but I have a real interest in like family dynamics, and obviously Diana and Prince Harry. So for example, Diana and Prince Harry have both got their own mental health issues. Diana was labelled by the family. Thankfully the public didn't buy into it. They might have at first, but she was very much labelled with her issues. When she came forward and spoke about how she felt and the truth of it, she was labelled as hysterical, dramatic, childlike, ill, she must be perceiving it wrong, she's attention seeking, all those things we hear about women. So like that was what they labelled her, that's how they labelled her, and that took away her agency, and it invalidated her. Now it's interesting that with Harry now, when he talks about his mental health issues, which obviously, you know, you can see his background of losing a parent so publicly, all that he went through, when he talks about it, he's treated as if he's not being masculine enough, like he's not allowed to hold his emotions. It's assumed by a lot of bad faith people that he's being controlled, he must be controlled by his wife, he's not masculine enough, like he's not manning up, he needs to deal with it and stop talking about it. It's just really bad. So I'm going to wrap this up, but I think so many of these problems do come from ignorance, and I do have compassion because I think that it comes from people who really beat themselves up. And that's why I talk about this stuff, because I'm hoping that like the more we talk about this, the more people will kind of understand. Like, even like seeing me, like in some videos I cry, in some videos I seem fine, like I've always got the illness, you know, I've always got BPD, I've always got those issues, but some days are better than others, you know. It's not like you're one thing all the time, that's just not the truth. My family reaction has gone from, she's fine, she's fine, she's fine, she's fine, like let's deny it, like if she's ill, like she's being naughty, like come on, come on, come on. It's gone from that to, yes, Claudie's ill, and that's okay, like that's just part of her. How can we help her? And I'll be forever grateful to my family for that growth. And I never want anyone to think, like, when I talk about how it was in the past, you know, I don't ever want anyone to think, like, badly of, like, the way the family dealt with it, because so many other families were the same. People did not understand that stuff. They loved me very much, and they were desperate for me to be okay, so they went about it wrong. But they loved me, and whenever there was a physical symptom, they took me to get sorted out. And, you know, they really, really support me now. They're wonderful. We're so close. I love them so, so much. And the reason I'm talking about this is because you might have the same experience, unfortunately. But hopefully us talking about this stuff now means that the next generation coming up, their parents might see these videos, you know. They might read about stuff. Other children might not be in that situation. Parents will be equipped to deal with it. Like, they'll be kinder to themselves, so they'll be kinder to others too. And obviously, like, the thing that I started with here was, you know, Grandad being a GP, and like, obviously, even with Grandad as a GP, the mental illness stuff was missed. But I just want to end this by saying that, like, Grandad is the best grandfather you could ever ask for. We're so close. I tell him this all the time. He's a hero. He is a gentleman. He is just wonderful. He means so much to me. I absolutely adore him. And he was a wonderful doctor, and he is a wonderful person, a wonderful granddad, and he just makes me, I get very depressed, but his presence makes me feel better, and him being in my life has made my life better. We're really close, and he's wonderful. I'm so, so lucky to have the support that I do from my family, and the growth that they've had, and that we've all had together. It's been really wonderful. It genuinely has been really wonderful. So yeah, I love my granddad very much. You probably know that if you follow my Instagram. I really, really love my granddad. Okay. I love you loads. Sorry this is long, but this is actually the best I've felt in days, so I'm hoping that it continues. I'm really hoping. And maybe soon in a video you'll actually see me in proper clothes and with makeup. I did put proper clothes on for Dan's birthday, which was yesterday, which felt so weird because it had been like 9 weeks. I've just been in pyjamas all the time. But I'm hoping there's going to be good days and bad days, obviously, as I recover. I do know that, but because there are good days, it gives me hope, because even when I'm having the bad ones, I can think, right, okay, that maybe tomorrow will be good. So anyway, I love you loads. I'll see you really soon. I obviously mentioned that I just want to say one more time, I mentioned the trolling and there has been harassment, etc. If you see that, then please be gentle, because I do, you know, I do love my cousins, so and it's a complicated situation, and I only knew her as a child. She's a young woman, but I've always loved her. I always will love her, and it's complicated. It's just a complicated situation. So yeah, if you could just report that stuff, it would be really helpful to me. But yeah, okay. I love you loads. See you really soon. Please be kind to yourselves. Please be kind to yourselves. And if anyone ever gets any guilt, like I always say this, but if anyone ever gets any guilt, if you're someone who watched me in the past and like was nasty or something and didn't get it, or I promise you, you don't even have to, like, don't feel bad. You don't have to feel bad. It's okay, I do get it. Alright, I love you loads and I'll see you really soon. Bye.